Well, I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. This is the first in a series of 3 panels that we're going to be doing this fall, and really the focus is around excellence. This panel, which I'm very excited about, and we'll talk about that in a second, but really the focus is excellence, building elite companies and maximizing defense and intelligence sector exits. We will have a follow-on panel on November 12th, which will be Excellence by Design, Best Practices in Private Equity Deal Structuring and Valuation. And then the third panel that we'll be hosting will be November 26th, Excellence by Design, From Good to Great in Private Equity Support. So really, to the extent that you're signed up for this panel, you will automatically be signed up for those as well. So hopefully folks are able to make it. To the extent that you aren't able to make the panel live, we will have a recording, I believe, on our website. With that said, I'm really excited about this panel. The 3 folks that we have, and I'll let them introduce themselves, are all very good friends of mine and frankly former clients of the firm. I'd say it's one thing to sort of, build a successful company and have a successful exit. But I think the 3 panelists that you'll hear from today really built highly technical companies that sought to solve very difficult problems. And I think what goes along with that, recruiting and retaining very talented people. So again, very excited to get going. What I'll do is I'd like to start the panel maybe by just having each panelist introduce themselves, maybe talk a little bit about the company that they built, and then really answer the question about the origin story. What was the spark or the problem that you were trying to solve at the outset? And how did your vision evolve as the company grew and scaled? So with that, let me turn it over to Jeff Chapman.
Hey, thanks, Mitch. As Mitch said, I'm Jeff Chapman, the former founder of Babel Street, now board member. The way we got started, we were a SaaS company, still are, and the way we got started was we were solving a problem that I saw sitting in the chair working in the specific U.S. government agency. And the problem existed in that the government needed to be able to harness commercial data as well as what we now call this open source data, and was seemingly incapable of it from a few different reasons. One, they didn't have the ability to really consume the data on the high side. They didn't have the contract apparatus to do it. And then there was no sharing between the agencies. And it created this sort of stovepipe for guys like me that needed to be able to harness this data quickly. And so I was fortunate several years before this to start and sell a company, and I developed 3 rules for starting a company, which I applied when I started Babel Street, which was the first and foremost is, will this endeavor make enough money to make it worth my while to go do this? Because we're all allotted X number of hours in our lifetime, and do I want to allot those hours to go do whatever this is? And the second is let's assume the answer is yes, is can I do it? Do I have the skills, the determination, so on and so forth to see this through? And if the answer is yes, you go to the third is, do I really want to do it? Is this something that I wake up about and I'm passionate about, I go to bed thinking about? And if the answer is yes, then look, you've got an idea. And this idea just wouldn't leave me. It felt like a calling because I knew lives were on the line, people were dying, potential future lives. And it's not that I was the only guy, but I felt like I was put in a position at that time to see an innovation that really needed to happen. And so I started with a grand plan that I was going to build this and basically sell it to one organization, and somebody would buy it, and then I would leave. and what's funny is, fast forward sort of 15 years later, that organization that I was going to sell to is still never bought. We sold to everybody else on the planet except for them. The complexity increased pretty significantly as the data world really increased, both by volume, the amount of data that we were seeing on a daily basis come out, the variety of data, whether it was social media or commercial data being sold or whatever it was, and then the speed at which it was coming at us. And then you cut that with each one of our clients needed to see it a little differently. And so what I started was with this finite problem that I was going to solve. And as I got knee deep into it, the problem became exponentially bigger. And that kept us going every day. And so that's where we got to really where we are today. Thanks, Mitch.
Great. Fantastic. Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. I'm really glad to be here with this panel. The former founder of Ampsight, we just completed our deal in May, so early into this. But our founding vision was really to protect the nation through cybersecurity superiority. We had been early adopters of the cloud and really saw the mission impact that could bring, faster, better, cheaper. But there was a lot of impediments, especially on the security side, to get everyone comfortable with it and get it deployed and useful. So that's why we started Ampsight, and really passionate about the area and making the mission impact. And I think that's really important to have that mission focus going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Ryan?
Again, thanks, Mitch. It's a great opportunity. So company I founded was Applied Defense Solutions. We were really early in the space business, so founded about 20 years ago before it was cool. There was at that time, the vision of the company clearly evolved because the market radically evolved over that period of time. So in the beginning, in the early days, the first problem I had was I was in my mid to late 20s, so I had no idea what I was doing. So if you asked me to articulate my vision then, I probably couldn't have done it in any kind of an efficient way. It was mostly about survival. One of my mentors gave me a good piece of advice: is success in business is about surviving long enough to get lucky. And the idea Jeff mentioned about the person that you thought would buy from you never did, but you just hustled enough to find everybody else, and frequently the people that you didn't, so that you never expected to buy from you. So we effectively, over the long run, built the system that you would effectively call the battle management system for a significant part of the space community. So ICDOD, Air Force at the time, Air Force Space Command. The vision that we had in the beginning was mostly about creating efficiency in the early days around very unique skill sets that there wasn't a lot of scale in the industry. So having unique, competent skill sets that you could sort of segment across a bunch of customers, almost in a consulting sort of way, just because again the demand wasn't there. As things evolved, it really became about finding the best people, and where the business went. In my industry, it was kind of probably unique compared to cyber or some other sort of a more larger and more developed, I guess, markets. We hired really smart people. We got out of their way. We did a lot of capital allocation in places that they were passionate about. And that question of how did the company evolve as it scaled? It became about the process of having a lot of really, really smart thought leaders contributing their vision to helping the business go where it needed to go, because neither I nor my co-founder were really capable of understanding the industry at the level you'd need to be able to really drive it where it wanted to go. So that was our innovation, was listening to people.
I'd be curious, and maybe Ryan's staying with you. When you think about excellence kind of in building a company, sort of on a day-to-day basis, maybe talk through sort of call it your battle rhythm, and maybe what were some of the focus areas, culture, product, customer delivery, and maybe how you prioritize things.
Yeah, so the point about culture is a really good one. So I had to define culture in an actionable way for me to be able to build something that would be interesting for people to want to work at, and that I'd be able to recruit to. And so for me, I define culture as expectations. So what expectations do your employees have? What expectations do your customers have? And as we again built the company with the expectation that if you had a good idea, we would see it through. If you were passionate about writing a proposal into a particular customer and it wouldn't have made the if you're an individual line engineer and you have that kind of passion, we would work really hard to sort of get it through our review process so that it would get bid. It would be bid no bid. If we could afford it, we would have a lot of it. They could see the influence. We couldn't always do it, but we could always demonstrate that we were willing to. And sort of that employee thought leader forward model drove what we became as a business, which effectively was, if we had a machine, it was the not getting arrogant about who we were and having the leadership team be the conduit through which people did. And in our industry, and I can't say that that wouldn't work if you're making an iPhone. But for our industry, listening to smart people and helping them affect their vision, didn't always get there. You had to apply business criteria. Like, is it going to make money? I mean, very much the same rules that Jeff had in place, but we didn't have to be the seminal element of the seminal idea maker for every time that something was going to come up. And it became about building a machine that would affect that vision. So a chief operating officer whose mindset was, how do we facilitate? A revenue officer who was looking to find, putting those pieces together so that you can do new things, find new customers, grow the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff, I'd be curious, kind of similar question. And I think you had a very unique culture, obviously, a lot of your developers coming out of Mississippi State and, but maybe talk a little bit about that. I think, like Ryan, I think you were pretty deliberate about it.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. We were deliberate about it. We started with the first thing, as a former intel officer, the things that is imbued in us is never fail the operator, right? Never fail the operator. Attention to detail matters. And we carried that over and just changed the last part, which is never fail the client. Never fail the client, right? Because at the end of the day, they were going to be using our software for life decisions. And so our attention to detail mattered, and that flowed from me down to the most junior developer, to the point, for instance, we were on sprint reviews at the time. We had multiple teams, but every week the company would stop what it's doing. The entire company would come into a virtual meeting to watch the sprint reviews. And if I didn't see anybody that I was looking for on a sprint review, I would text them and I would say, hey, why are you on a sprint review? And the reason for that was everybody needs to be able to internalize what it is we're trying to do in order to grab an oar of innovation, right? The innovation can't exist just with the chief product officer or just with bringing back feedback from clients. Because sometimes, in the Henry Ford thing, he said his clients would have asked for faster horses, right? Instead of Motor T or the Model T. So, you need the everybody to be on the oar of innovation. And so the sprint reviews were a way for us to do that and come together and understand that, hey, at the end of the day, we are a software company. The other thing that we did internally was everybody in the company had to be able to give a demo of the software. Everybody. Because again, if you couldn't say what we did and couldn't explain it to people, and I led from the front, I always gave demos. If you were in any of my meetings, Mitch, I always led the demos because I feel like you have to lead from the front. And as a CEO, I feel like if you can't lead, then you've outsourced the innovation and you have actually just jumped the shark and you're not really leading an innovation company. Steve Jobs is a great example of leading from the front on innovation. And then because of the work that we did was a lot dealing with bad things happening to good people in the world where we were trying to prevent them. Occasionally we weren't able to prevent them, but we were able to come in behind it from an investigative side and help figure out who that was. We had a rule that we never profited from tragedy. We would surge to support whoever that was and then give them a pause. And then 4 to 6 months later, we would go back to them and say, look, if you liked what we did, we're happy to have a conversation with you, but we're not here to sell you software today. We're actually going to give you software because that's our whole reason for being here. And so I think those rules really permeated through. And if you could walk up to any employee, junior HR, junior, programmer, they knew every one of those rules. And they knew exactly when we did it.
That's fantastic. And Andy, I'd be curious too, just kind of along the same lines. Obviously, you grew very quickly, and then also, you had previously, been a leader in a company that had grown and exited before. I'd be curious, as we talk about sort of culture and a culture of excellence, frankly, I'd be curious kind of lessons you learned from the first time that you applied most recently, and then also just given the growth to the extent that you had a culture, how you maintain that with so many new people coming in a short period.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of what I'll say is going to echo what Ryan and Jeff had said, is that, really learning that culture is really important, kind of programming that from the beginning will really help you scale. Because when you're, 5 people on a couch with ideas starting off, You can all work and really drive excellence, but as you know, you're 100, 150, the only way to scale that is through culture. And we had the same thing. We had sprint reviews on Fridays, demo Fridays. We'd get the whole company together, and we were consulting, so we had to work with our customers, get everyone back. But it's really important to have everyone know what everyone was doing on every project. The management team, everyone was involved. It was a fun event, but it was also very serious that we were trying to get better, really turn that flywheel, and improve and make sure that permeated throughout the company. So yeah, if I had to do it again, yeah, doubling down on culture and really being thoughtful and setting that up from the beginning is really important.
I'd be curious, Andy, too, one, and you were a fantastic client. One of the things, I feel like you relied heavily on metrics. Everything was kind of measured. You were always looking. I'd be curious, as you think about building your company, some of the metrics that really you thought were most important, and then frankly, did that change from maybe previous company, or even as you built Ampsight, what you measured, what you thought was important?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that helped, I think, Mitch, was McLean Group's metrics framework. So we used McLean, early on for 409A valuation, which is good. Everyone should do that. But it included a really government contracting focused metrics framework. And it was really a balanced scorecard of like financial, sales, and contracts, but also forward-looking metrics around talent, solutions, IP. I think that was really helpful because it not only looked at like the customer perspective and employee perspective, but what a potential buyer would and what would drive enterprise value. So that framework was really helpful in kind of structuring how we regrew the company.
Got it. Well, appreciate you saying that. I didn't intend to tee that up, but
yeah, it really was a big help. So
no, that's fantastic. Ryan, I'd be curious, we talk about inflection points, and as you mentioned, you started the company, ran it for a while. Can you talk about, was there a point where you knew you had crossed a threshold, or you knew that, you were no longer maybe a startup or an earlier stage and maybe something different? And then along with that, did that cause you to manage things differently?
Yeah, so for sure. So let's see. So to frame that properly for my business, again, I did not start with a ton of capital and a singular vision, right? We built a number of different software products over the years, but really started as a consulting company. And so when we were building solutions or implementing solutions, a lot of times we'd bring NRE to a customer to say, hey, we've got this whole baseline of capability, but there's all these varying models. But at the end of the day, what got my attention was when it stopped being this business model where we were staff augmentation. We brought skills and did things, and we got to a point where our customers didn't ask us to justify, to defend positions, so that we were sort of viewed as the experts. And almost to the point when it first started happening, I was a little bit unnerved. So, in engineering, especially for space, you expect to be challenged. And when you come in and tell somebody that this is the answer, and you're expecting, right, like you're expecting to bring some momentum to the conversation. Like, I want them to know that I really think this is the answer. So I think this is the answer. And they're like, okay. And now the value that you're adding is different. You're not adding a solution to a problem that they had. You're enabling a capability they didn't have before. And when the customer starts to see you that way, when they start to transition who you are in their head, that's for good or for bad. That's really when you change. Are you a partner, as an example, in getting a mission done, in solving getting into specific, I don't want to get into specifics here, but what are you a critical element in getting a solution done, or are you help? And even when we were in the product world, it wasn't like that was simply the level of our expertise. It was, frequently they would say, is a thing possible? Go talk to ADS and find out whether or not that's observable. Is this mission doable? And it also changed your responsibility. And you really had to change your culture for to make sure, because you get to be that guy until you do it wrong once, and when you get that wrong, you're never that guy again. So, or at least you have to earn it back over a long period of time. So again, the culture changes, and you start to just view yourself more like a parent. Honestly, it feels very similar to being a parent.
I'd be curious, and maybe on a related note, and for everybody, when we talk about sort of major failures or near misses, can you think of an example where you had a setback and that sort of forced you to kind of relook at everything, and maybe whether it's raise standards or make some changes or do something so that doesn't happen going forward, and maybe in the process you improved your organization? Maybe Jeff, you want to, if you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I would say there's probably three things, and they're not equally rated. So I'll double tap on the first one, which is hire slowly, fire quickly. Most of the bad decisions that I made were not firing quickly enough. And so, once somebody, you justify like, oh, let me get this contract, or let me do this, or they're instrumental, but you underestimate what the cancer creates in the organization. And so I cannot emphasize enough that once somebody shows you who they are, regardless of what the revenue is tied to it, you got to get rid of them because there's just so much headache that's tied with it. That would be the first. Second is, as you go through this process, there's going to be a lot of people whispering in your ear saying, oh, well, you should do this. You should serve this client base, or you should, you want to get to the rule of 40, or, maybe you want to be more software and less consulting or whatever. Just stay with who you are, because you'll find yourself doing unorthodox things, chasing a client that you wouldn't have to hopefully impress somebody that's not going to care when you get there. Or, at the end of the day, the business the best, trust your gut, take in what folks are telling you, but don't do anything unorthodox for your business. Just keep doing what you're doing that's gotten you to this point.
Absolutely. Andy, any kind of examples on your end of sort of failures and kind of how you responded?
Yeah, so we kind of we're starting the company, had a great first year, and then COVID hit. So being able to be resilient and adapt to like external factors, and I'm sure now with shutdowns and Doge, it's a very dynamic environment. But having some resiliency built in, and making sure you have enough capital to weather those times. That's because there's a lot of external turbulence going on. So be prepared for that, and then be ready for the upside when things change. So
yeah, absolutely. And then Ryan, kind of same question. Anything come to mind?
Yeah. So it's the nature of the mistake matters. I find that you can't expect your staff to get it right all the time, but you can expect yourself to get it right all the time. And if you hold yourself to that standard, I think you become a good a manager of people, in the sense that people feel confident that they can take risks and make mistakes. And when they happen, if they handle them properly, if they learn from them, it matters. So the best example I have is I had a mission failure. Something blew up on launch, actually damaged the pad that we were on. And I had too much customer concentration risk. I had no plan. I had a whole, probably 20% of my staff, 30% of my staff was unemployed like Monday morning. And we had to think on our feet without, as Andy pointed out, the capital reserves to figure it out, and no meaningful plan. And that wasn't a mistake I made on that day. It was and we weren't a startup that had to take that kind of risk. It was just me being an idiot for probably 4 or 5 months, not asking the right questions, not doing the right things. And that's just not an excuse you get as an executive leader like that, as a senior executive like that. You don't get to make that kind of. So those are the ones that stick with me. It's the things that they seem out of your control. But as the founder and CEO of the business, you don't get the luxury of having bad luck. You got to be prepared for pretty much everything, and you got a lot of your time and resources dedicated to you figuring out how to see it coming. All your employees are working 100 hours a week. They don't have time to worry about the coulda, woulda, shoulda, what might happen in the future. And there's no done. You don't know when you're finished worrying. So you got to get that right.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe shifting gears a little bit, talking about kind of the sale process. and don't think we need to get into the weeds on the process itself. Maybe, talk about when you started thinking about it, and then what kind of steps did you take? And I think there's probably, there's obviously, environmental factors. Maybe you're looking at competitors that, are more heavily capitalized. Maybe it's looking at larger opportunities. And then frankly, there's the personal piece. Obviously it's, sometimes there's a need for a change. And, and I think certainly energy is a big factor in sort of how well you can perform, and being able to take a step back at some point can make sense. But maybe talking a little bit about considering that process. Andy, did you want to kind of talk through it a little bit?
Yeah. So I think we started pretty early, kind of with the end in mind, and kind of our mantra going in was, a company that you want to sell is a company you want to keep. That the things you do to prepare for a sale is what you'd want to do to have a well-run company. So we took several, I think, operational steps. We talked about the valuation and kind of the framework to kind of know where you are. I know we met early, Mitch, with your team, even, a couple years before we were, looking to exit. Just so so your bankers know the business, they can talk to it, they can kind of, help you with the market, was really important. And we also had a pre-diligence checklist. So we kind of structured all of our corporate back office, contracts, legal, HR, around this kind of diligence checklist, just so we were prepared when it happened, and made the process go a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I thought you guys did a fantastic job on the organization, and as you mentioned, the reaching out early, starting to think about that. As long as it doesn't become a distraction, which it certainly did. I think that makes all the sense in the world. Jeff, I'd be curious. You as well. And I know, obviously you had investors, things like that. So there were certain expectations, but maybe talk a little bit about your thought process.
Yeah, look, I was fortunate to tell of two different ones. So the exit on the first one was not buttoned up, not as, I didn't have to start with the end in mind, like Andy was talking about. With this one, we started with the end in mind. We sort of knew, we didn't know when, but we knew it was coming. So in-house, we had GC, we had CFO. We were squared away. We were thinking ahead when we signed a contract, what are the T's and C's and how would that impact us going forward? Like, all of those things rolled into it. But at the macro level, we were at basically year 7 or 8 for some of our investors. And those of you that are, CEOs and you're taking money from other people, they're making an alternative or decision whether to put this money in the market or something else or give it to you. And so when it's sitting, on your balance sheet, for 7 or 8 years, they're wondering, hey, when's the return? And so, that was sort of a catalyst for us to start thinking. We had one strategic on our cap table at the time, and the strategic decided, hey, we're probably going to buy you guys. And for those of you that don't know the story, I told the story a little bit ago at the Naval kind of Entrepreneur Forum. But we were to the 11th hour and 59th minute of closing the deal with our strategic. And the day before we're supposed to close, they called and said they had to put it off indefinitely. And so it forced us, now the entire company is pregnant with this idea that we're selling, forces us our hands to say, okay, now we're going to run a process. And we were working with Mitch through that as we were thinking through it. And then we get preempted by Veritas to come in and buy us before we ran the process. So that's sort of how it goes. As far as like, operationally, I think we were ready. Data room, we were ready. Emotionally, I think people were more than ready. From a due diligence standpoint, it sort of is what it is. But I can't stress enough what Andy said, which is, look, just have clean books every day. Be thinking about the contracts you sign, thinking about any legal issues that you may have on HR or anything else, and just have that all ready. And it doesn't have to be like it has to be no issues. You just have to be able to explain why you did what you did.
Sorry, just to carry on is, everyone has issues and people understand as long as they're, you handled them appropriately, because everyone has it. They weren't really a big issue for the buyers as long as they were handled.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and frankly, we see that quite a bit, and that's, a reason to, populate the data room early and kind of make sure that you're getting in front of anything before you get going. And I'll circle back. I have kind of a related question to that, but kind of Ryan, maybe same questions. Curious.
So
Yeah.
I am not as smart as Jeff or Andy, and I certainly wasn't as smart as Jeff or Andy when I was selling my business. And like every other area of my business, the number one thing, all of the things Jeff and Andy said were true. But with the emotional attachment you have to it, the day job that you have, you can no more be you can no more think you're going to be the singular thing that pulls it through than you could think you're going to be the guy that's going to like fix your own, your own cancer surgeon. Like you need to have a Mitch. I say that all the time. I don't necessarily care who your guy is, but you have to have somebody that you implicitly trust, that you know is going to grind for you, that you know when you ask questions, they'll either give you the right answer or they'll tell you they don't know and they'll go figure it out. But you got to run the business every day, and you can't. And it's a long process. I went through I won't mention names, but ironically similar situation, if you remember, Mitch, to what Jeff went through. And we had a very close advisor to the business. He took a big job. He wanted to buy our business. That didn't happen, and there was another buyer right there that took us off the street almost immediately. Also, like, just the other thing I would say about it is, like, be prepared, but like be prepared for things to happen outside your window, outside your view, that have influenced things, and you don't want to get caught flat. So the number one thing that I can recommend if you have a space business is to be ready for exit just about the time the president decides to stand up the Space Force, because then, and those are the kinds of things, obviously you can't plan that, but when you do, valuations go crazy. And my partner and I would have spent the next 4 or 5 years chasing that valuation, and we could get it off the street at the time that happened. So be prepared, because things happen that are outside of your purview, and don't think you're going to do it yourself. All the things Jeff and Andy said are absolutely true, but the number one thing I say is have somebody in your corner that you trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'd be curious, we touched on due diligence a little bit, populating data rooms, and obviously a buyer, they're going to have, they're going to be doing a buy side Q of E, and they're going to have a legal review of contracts, things like this. I'd be curious, and I've seen this, I think, just about every engagement. You kind of go through the diligence process, and people tend to learn things that maybe they didn't know about the company. Not necessarily good or bad, but just, it's almost inevitable. But I'd be curious, any thoughts on, you go through the diligence process, what are some things maybe that you learned, or some things that kind of surprised you? Whoever wants to jump in and take that. Jeff?
Well, I would say never be surprised at the number of questions you come back to, even though you think you're buttoned up. So you think it's all in the data room and it's all straightforward, and there's 500 RFIs that come back. Sometimes I think it's an exercise in just seeing how you answer the question, even though the information's there. Sometimes it's literally they didn't know. The other thing about due diligence is anybody that tells you it's going to go quick, that's the exception, not the rule. It can go quick for sure, but it's probably going to be a little longer, and people are going to ask for extensions. And yeah, so just be prepared for that.
Yeah. Andy?
Yeah, no, echo the 500 follow-on questions from from the data room. I think it went pretty smooth, having, like Ryan said, someone like Mitch, your team to really help you really helps the process, because you do get a lot of follow-on questions, and you have to answer the same question 3 times for different parties. So going through that, one thing we learned is we did have a lot of capabilities, or just like culture, the way we did things that we took for granted, that had a lot of value, that were kind of brought out. So on the positives, there's things you have to address, but on the positive side, there's probably a lot that uncovered value that you have that can come out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think too, and Andy, to the extent that taking best practices to the acquirer as well, and and maybe there are some things that you do differently that might be adopted. Ryan, I'd be curious, kind of your thoughts.
I haven't been since exit on the buy side, and I obviously was on the sell side too. Like I can't overestimate the damage that surprises produce and there are going to be mistakes, and the mistakes that everyone understands that you made or left out or have questions about, that's fine. But this is a process. You're not selling a used car here. This is a protracted relationship. And as I did, I left the business. That I got thrown out of my own office the day I sold. So I wasn't connected to it, but I was connected to all the people. So it's a long-term relationship that you have, whether you like it or not. And so anything that you're going to do that's going to damage trust, you need to get out soon and not let it surprise anybody. Or even if it does, as long as even if it's a big deal and you missed it, if you missed it, you missed it. But like, people know what you saw and what you knew. Anyway, you just be very conscious of getting the hard things out first. And as an example, as I said, on my exit, I did not have the virtues of character required to be involved after I sold it, especially working for Wall Street. And so I told them before I even took a meeting with them that if I sell this business, I am leaving the day it happens. And no one ever, it's rare. I don't find too many people that have done that, especially in a highly technical business like mine. But I said it on day one. We never had an issue with it. And I really do believe that would have damaged, if I had surprised them late in that, it would have killed the deal. So.
I'd be curious, Ryan, and you touched on it, and I think, a super important point. Maybe talk a little bit about preparing employees. There's obviously there's going to be early stages in the process where maybe you have a limited group that's read into what you're doing. At some point, you need to expand that to a broader group, maybe make the announcement. But I'd be curious for the three of you, sort of what were some of the steps you took, maybe in hindsight, some of the things you would have done differently, to make employees as comfortable as they can be. I mean, obviously this is always going to be, viewed as sort of turmoil, and maybe folks are nervous, but being able to present it as an opportunity, being able to present, growth within the organization, that sort of thing. I'm just curious how the three of you approached it. Ryan, just maybe, yeah.
I'm probably the easiest to these guys. I was the least sophisticated seller. And what I can say is the best way to present it as an opportunity is to make sure it actually is. We didn't have venture. We didn't have any private equity. We didn't have long-term investors breathing down our neck. So it's different. There's an element of that obviously the story's different, but we wanted to be sure that the people on the technology that we developed had a future, that the direction that our employees could go and the roles that they would have would be meaningful. That wasn't like out of the goodness of our heart. I mean, it was because that actually maximizes valuation. Like if you have a team that's technically excellent and you're selling to somebody who is willing to buy it, but they don't have a plan, there's no faith in how it is they're going to execute, it's not the right buyer. Anyway, so and what I would say is, like, I sold to L3 about 9 months before Harris bought them. And I don't know that Harris would have been a transaction I did. And it's not there's anything against Harris, it's just the way that they run their space business is fundamentally different than the way that they run that L3 ran their business. And I don't know that we would have had the value to Harris. So I think as owners and as operators, we think about maximizing value almost and this is not wrong to do this, but as a sort of MBA style case study. We're going to get this right, and we view it in that ecosystem. But the reality of selling a business is it's part of a much bigger connected system, and you should be paying attention to those things to maximize value, to make sure that your team has a transition plan and your technology is going to live on. So it's very organic is really my point.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, I'd be curious to get your feedback. And obviously your company is acquired by Vibrant. You're still obviously operating as a combined entity, but maybe thoughts on sort of preparing the employees, and would be curious, even taking a step further, maybe since you are still kind of active, kind of thoughts on integration and sort of you complete the transaction, kind of that first 90 days and what that process, what you think the best practices are there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we had that I think we were fortunate on, every employee had stock options in the company. So when there was a transaction, it was good for everyone, both financially, so everyone was part of it. So that really, we felt helped. Um, but it is hard because you don't want to bring people too quick into the deal, if it's delayed or doesn't happen and expectations. So kind of managing that, a lot of time and effort, and wish I had some good advice, but it's it's just hard. Um, and then yeah, start the integration planning early. Um, we set up several Tiger teams, both for HR, IT, um, business development, sales, engineering, to really help integrate the teams from day one.
Yeah.
And to kind of expand the family, and then work on culture, because even if you have similar cultures, things are still a little different. So you have to spend a lot of time, defining what you want it to be going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jeff, I'd be curious kind of your perspective on kind of preparing employees and maybe just as you look back, did you do that in the right way, or maybe some things you might have done differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I stayed on for about a year with the company. Intended to stay longer, just life events happened. Decided to do some other things. I think by me staying, I think that helped quell any sort of major disruption. Not that I was but it showed some sort of continuity there, for sure. For those, if there's any sort of, as this PEs love to use the word cost takeouts, synergies, if you will. If those apply to people, be thinking about that in advance on how you can take care of them. We did that with some of ours for sure. We knew like most likely this is what's happening, and so how you get in front of that. The people that you really are like, absolutely, in order for this thing to be successful, we need them to be here 4 or 5 years. You've got to get an incentive plan in front of them that shows them like, hey, you're valued here. So, and again, I think this is going to go to something maybe you asked in a little bit, but like, you just got to be able to see the vision. And for us, we knew it was going to be time to be doing some acquisitions for us. And so it made sense. You're either going to have to join a bigger team or form a bigger team. And once we decided we weren't joining a bigger team, it was time for us to form the bigger team.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And maybe Jeff, kind of, sticking with that, would love to know, and maybe if you want to talk about a little bit, kind of what some of the things you're currently working on and what you're doing today, but, maybe in perspective, post-transaction, looking back, has your definition of excellence changed? And as you think about sort of the path that you took, what are some advice, what's some advice you'd give founders, and maybe just if you were to do it again, what are some things that you think about?
Yeah, look, I don't think my definition of excellence has changed. I think I've gotten sharper at being able to pick it out, what it is, and maybe even see it in its rougher forms, as opposed to when it reaches finely tuned or finely polished. For the founders that want to go down, look, it's important as you go down this path is to never forget purpose that you're doing this for, right? And because the moment you stray from that, it's not that you can't pivot. It's not that you can't have different business models. You should always innovate. But that mission, that purpose that got you to start this business, you always have to rally around that. And you have to get people to buy into your vision on why you're rallying around that. When it comes to liquidity event, whether you're going to a strategic or whether you're going to, a financial partner like a PE, you got to pick the right partner, and you got to be able to make sure that you share the same vision. Because if you don't share the same vision post-event, there's going to be calamity, and nobody wants calamity. It's supposed to be a time that everybody's having good times. And so as much as you can up front, sort that part out. Like there's our cadence. We want to buy a company in year 1. We want to buy a company in year 3. These are the elements that we're looking at. This is the profile that we think they are. They're between 20 to 50 million. We think they're going to do A, B, and C. here's the synergy, and this is what we look like at year 5, right? That vision's important, and because really and truly, a lot of times they're going to be looking to you to drive that home. So don't outsource that vision. Keep the vision with yourself. Find a partner and go do it. So yeah, thanks, Mitch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be curious, Jeff, just maybe talk a little bit about the things you're working on today. Obviously, still still involved with Babel Street, but maybe curious kind of just how you're spending your time.
Sure. Yeah. So still on the board of Babel. I started with a couple other Naval Academy guys, a venture fund called Waypoint Ventures, and we back service academy grads starting companies. And so it's put me on the other side of the fence now, albeit still with an operator mindset of looking for good companies and trying to coach up some of the CEOs who, to be honest with you, are amazing and they really don't need much coaching, maybe more encouragement. So
yeah,
it's great.
Andy, I'd be curious, and I know you're obviously still actively kind of working in the business, but as you think about in hindsight, kind of definition of excellence, if that's changed at all, and I'd also be curious, Jeff mentioned sort of, needing to continue to reinforce the vision and, finding partners, whether that's employees, backers. I'd be curious, as you think about kind of the vision that you had and continue to have, is that something that you have to continue to sell, or is it you hire the right people that automatically kind of have that, or is it maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think starting off, with the definition of excellence, I think it's still the same, but it's a lot more about scaling. You're part of a bigger team, and you've got to really scale this. The investors are interested in much bigger returns and outcomes. So you've got to really scale that, and I think that gets to selling a vision. I think that's always there. It's continual as you're bringing on new employees, new teammates. You've got a expanded management team you're working with. So really, having the same vision, but kind of drawing that down into cultural behaviors and getting to the details of what that means is really important. And one note, there was a recommended reading, for entrepreneurs, that there's a book, Beyond the Exit, and it may be one of the only ones out there, because it's like, oh, you sell, an entrepreneur lives happily ever after. There's just not a lot of material on the happily ever after. So it's a good read about different options, whether starting venture funds, working in the business, doing, charitable work. So but yeah, it's there's not a lot of talk about what comes after. So,
and I think that's a super important kind of comment, and frankly, something we see with our clients all the time. I think, I think entrepreneurs, folks that, are successful doing the kinds of things you guys have done, you tend to be very type A personalities, tend to be, very immersed in sort of the business that they've created. And, frankly, even sometimes, even if they think they have a plan, we see that where they'll sell and there's a little bit of a gap there, and they're not sure, there's all this sort of energy ready to put forward and do things, and you're not sure actually how to expend that. And we've seen, whether it's charity, whether it's, and as you mentioned, whether it's starting new things, but that is something that sometimes I'm a little bit surprised. You figure when people get to that stage, they kind of have a plan for what's next, and that's not always the case.
Well, I would,
yeah, right.
Just a quick comment on that, and this is something I spend a lot of time working with my friends who are in post-exit situations. Is you have this confluence of issues, and one of the biggest one's identity. Like, who are you? Because you spend your entire, and there's lots of ways to define that, but I'll just point out that you spend your professional life being the type A guy that makes all the decisions, gets things finished and done, and you have to build up these, almost, for me, it was almost reluctantly building up the skill set of building up other people. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit to say that, but I was so focused in the beginning on doing it myself. And by the time I was close to exit, like, the things I could do were 1% of what could be done if I could affect other people. And then you sell, and all of a sudden, all the things that drive you, the infrastructure of your life, making sure you take care of your family and your bills and your employees and all this stuff, all that changes. You're no longer the person your identity is no longer the singular person sort of making that happen. And that's good. That's actually a really good thing. And one of the things I call it zombie land for my friends who get out and you can have a plan for what you think you're going to do, but your like temperament's completely changing. As Jeff pointed out, Service Academy guys, if you there's a book called Transitions that's made for people who are retiring out of the military, and that's absolutely worth a read because you're a completely different person. You don't go into it lightly, and as you prepare for what's next, you just have to. I think you have to build in that once you need to slow down, you really need to think about what you're going to do next. And to answer your original question, Mitch, today I'm on the advisory board for Voyager Space. We took them public a couple of months ago. I get involved in smaller, super high tech stuff that I can put my hands on and help the CEO be better, but but maintain agency over my own time. I don't have to be someplace, but I can check in when I want to, and it's almost like being a grandparent instead of being a parent. And then figuring out what your life, like what you want out of your life, and getting as aggressive and type A about what you want and where you want to be as you were about getting your business to where it needed to be. That is really, for me, the fundamental transition, and everybody should be prepared for that, because you are not. You just be prepared to not be prepared, because working on yourself aggressively as you worked on your other people in your business is it's hard. And there's a lot of bodies there you don't necessarily want to have to deal with.
I would just add that, the first day that you don't get an email or a phone call asking your thoughts on something, you go, this is sort of glorious. But what happens very quickly is that silence is really deafening, and it's you can find yourself in depression, and people are like, "Oh my God, you just sold a business. How are you depressed?" And I will say to everybody that listens to this, when I interviewed financial advisors, which everybody should do if you're thinking about it, you got to pick a good one. But when I would ask them the question, I would say, "How many successful entrepreneurs do you have in your stable of people that you advise?" And they'd say, however many. And I'd say, "Well, what's the commonality of those folks that just exited?" And several of them said to me, depression. And I just couldn't get it. Like, I didn't understand it. And I'm just telling you right now, I want to double tap on what Ryan said. Like, you're going to go through it. And regardless of how much you put in your banking account, you're going to go through it, and you got to be prepared for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be curious, again, as we talk about the journey, it just occurred to me, I think the three of you all have kids that are in the same sort of age ranges. Jeff, I know your oldest daughter in college. And I'm curious, kind of having gone through this, the advice you give them, and maybe sort of the conversations that you have with them. I speaking for myself, I think very differently today about how to advise my kids and so forth than maybe when I was their age and the things that mattered at the time. But especially ones that are inclined to be entrepreneurs. Curious what advice you're giving. Jeff, maybe.
Well, that's funny you bring this up. Look, we've had a long time where we talk through where we'll go through, and we'll be walking through a store or a mall, or they want to buy a person, and I'll say, "Hey, why don't you break down to me how you think they're making money here, right? Let's go through this, and we'll just use this as a little sort of lesson on how the money transpires here and the business model and so on and so forth." And ultimately, we say, we have a few things in our house. We don't make decisions on sunk costs, right? Now, you can ask all of them now, even down to the 13-year-old. They all know what sunk cost is, right? So I do try to take, now that was not the table that I grew up around, right? Like I wouldn't have known what that meant. And so I am trying to imbue some of these lessons that I've had over the years, but mainly just thinking about, hey, if there are some opportunities that you want to take an entrepreneur to be a little more advanced in their thinking maybe than I was when I started out. And so that they're more prepared for success, or more geared for success than maybe I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Andy, I'd be curious, and then Ryan, kind of maybe same question.
Yeah, this is going to sound like cliche, but you kind of, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you got to kind of enjoy the journey. There'll be a lot of hard times, and there's no guarantee of like a successful exit, so you can't really base it on that. So you got to really, enjoy what you're doing to get through the hard times, and kind of persevere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Ryan, that'd be
Yeah, my oldest was 9 when I sold, and my youngest is 9 now. And so what I would say is they didn't necessarily see the entrepreneurial journey, but I got a lot of, I saw them a lot because I deliberately, and as part of my decision making was I wanted to sort of be more involved than I would have been if I was working 100 hours a week. Um, and my thing with kids and excellence is like, you're not just giving them tools, like Jeff said, like think about how the business works. That's absolutely fabulous. The big mistake I see among entrepreneurs is thinking you're going to change the outcome. Like if your kid was born on was put on this earth to be a violinist, they're going to be a violinist, and there's like you're just there for the ride, baby. Like you can give them tools, um, but you got to be receptive to kind of what they want. And a lot of people don't necessarily think about entrepreneurship like they think about being an Olympic athlete. Like people know, like I'm never going to be an Olympic swimmer, no matter how much time or energy I spend. And that's also true of people who are just never going to be entrepreneurs. They can be a professor. They could, so just listen to who they are and be prepared to support them in whatever it is they do. But boy, when you get one when my oldest is very much oriented towards entrepreneurship, and it's like my wife is also an entrepreneur, but a different kind. She's a healthcare entrepreneur. So when we get started, she's just like, just go, just like it's wonderful. And my middle one's not that way. And so we don't, I try to do what Jeff does, give him some tools and see where it goes.
Yeah, perfect. Well, maybe a final question. I know we're coming up on time, and certainly would love to any, kind of final thoughts you might have for folks watching this. Many of them are going to be business owners, maybe in the middle of the process, but ahead of that, would be curious, as you think about the journey, what is your proudest moment as a business owner, as you think back at the various milestones and stages? Maybe it was the exit, but maybe it was something along the way. Andy, I'm not sure if you have a thought there.
Yeah, I think there's a couple. I think, we were really helping our clients and the mission, and all of our customers were very successful, whether they stayed in their positions or move on. And we helped on that aspect. And I think on the employee side, everyone had options. So everyone did well. And I think we gave them, the skills and the experience for whatever they should pursue, that they're prepared for it. So we were really able to impact people's lives. So that would be my proudest moment.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Jeff,
Yeah, I would say two, both impacting lives. Look, through our mission, we had a lot of impact, ultimately in the counterterrorism world and others throughout the years that is immeasurable on what it meant to start the company and ultimately do it, and the success that had. There's no amount of dollar point that you could put on that, on how you feel. I think to follow up on the previous point, which is, look, we took care of people when they came in, and so when we did sell, we minted several new millionaires, and that was a great feeling.
Absolutely. Ryan?
So similar in the sense that everybody had options. We had done a bad job of valuing our options. We were too conservative. So from the employee's perspective, I didn't even realize people thought this. They viewed us as having doubled their equity the day we sold, which was on paper true, but was also not in keeping with the my partner and I were like, this is what we promised you, and this is what we're going to do. And so we ended up being more generous than we expected to be, which had a great effect, right? Because people like, you're only up and up if you're doubling but that was the perception. I want to be clear, I did not actually do that, but that was the perception people had. I guess I could have lied to them. But point is, that was a wonderfully validating experience when people go out of their way to reach out to you. The second thing is that I had a hypo program, a high potential employee program, and I had probably 10 people that sort of went through that. Most of those people ended up leaving that enterprise, and some of them started going off and doing other things. And so, I had some of those guys come back and say, we love the culture that you built. We love the things that you did. We sure love you to be involved in our business. So I'm actually the president of a company that was founded by two of my former employees, which from my perspective as a leader was great, because the expectation of humility for me and being able to come in and not sort of try to dominate their baby, and just be trusted to be involved in that and having there's a sort of, anyway, that the idea that you could build something that people would look back and say, man, the things that you did were really cool. That was very validating for me. I'll tell you, the money makes no difference. I'm sure there are people in your pipeline, Mitch, that are going through all different sides. Like, but I maintain that once you get to about maybe if you're north of 15 million, like you get private jets and stuff cost more, but the fundamentally, like, there's no anxiety left in your life. And so the number that you actually brought it up to me, Mitch, there's this diminishing returns that happens pretty quickly. And wherever it is for you, there's other things matter far more than the incremental and the flat part of that curve. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, and obviously our reason for being is to sort of maximize value for our clients. But I do think it always is helpful to get perspective there. I'm a big believer in kind of utility curves, and you're right. After a certain point, there is kind of diminishing returns, and you have to start to weigh things.
Mitch, if I tell guys when they're thinking about this exit, I say, close your eyes. And when you started this business, and somebody said they were going to write you a check for X, would you have been happy for that? Okay. And if this number's north of that now, don't ever have the entrepreneur's dilemma. Don't have the entrepreneur's dilemma and say, if I stay in this another day, I can get X. Take it and go and consider it successful. You always got to remember where you started.
Yeah, I think that's very sound advice. And I think it can be challenging. You get into, you're in sort of this cohort with all your friends that run companies, and maybe they've sold them for certain valuations and things. And, as I said, the kinds of people that do this tend to be pretty competitive people anyway. So you kind of, I think it is easy to lose track a little bit. But yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. Any, I know we're coming up on time. Any kind of last final comments or anything that we want to present? Well, perfect. Well, listen, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. I know you're extremely busy. And I know sort of the folks that will be viewing this. I think there's been some valuable insights here. For kind of friends of the firm and the folks that are signed up, again, just want to reiterate that we will be having another session, Excellence by Design, Best Practices in Private Equity, Deal Structuring and Valuation, that will be coming on November 12th. If you're watching this, you are already signed up for that and can join. And again, hopefully this was helpful. Please do drop us a note if there's anything that you'd like to see included in these sessions. And certainly if there's follow-on questions for any of the folks on the panel, please do let me know, and we'll put you in touch.